The crystal ballroom smelled like expensive lilies and desperation. I stood in the shadows of the mezzanine, gripping a glass of champagne. I hadn't tasted watching my sister hold court. Samantha looked radiant, bathed in the spotlight, the sequins of her gown shimmering like a second skin. She tapped the microphone, and the room hushed, 200 of the city's elite leaning in. And finally she said, her voice dripping with that practiced, syrupy sweetness. She pointed her glass directly at me. To Morgan, our family's gloomiest bank account. Who finally bought a dress that doesn't look like a spreadsheet? Try to smile, Morgan. It's tax deductible. My father roared with laughter. My mother wiped a tear of mirth from her eye. The entire room erupted. I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. I just felt a very quiet, very expensive switch flip inside my chest. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. I didn't run to the bathroom to cry. I didn't storm the stage or throw my drink. I simply turned on my heel and walked out of the ballroom. The heavy oak doors swung shut behind me, muffling the applause until it sounded like distant static. The hallway was cool and empty. I leaned against a marble pillar, not for support but for stillness. I took a breath. It didn't shake. My pulse was steady. That was the thing about being a forensic accountant. You learn that panic is inefficient. Panic wastes time. And tonight, timing was the only asset I cared about. I pulled my phone from my clutch. Face ID recognized me instantly, which was ironic considering the people inside that room hadn't really seen me in 29 years. I opened the secure banking app. My thumb hovered over the biometric login. Inside that app sat the future of the Davis Empire. The merger my father had been bragging about for months, the expansion my mother had already spent the profits from the lifestyle Samantha was currently wearing. It all hinged on one thing. A $1.2 million commercial line of credit. And that line of credit existed solely because of my credit score, my assets, my signature. I navigated to the commercial lending portal. The screen was bright in the dim hallway. Status active, pending disbursement 48 hours. They were 2 days away from the wire transfer that would seal the merger. 2 days away from cementing their legacy, using my financial spine. And they had just used a microphone to tell 200 people that I was nothing but a gloomy bank account. Fair enough. I decided to close the account. I tapped Manage Guarantors. My name was listed at the top, Morgan Davis, primary guarantor. Beneath it, a small, unassuming button read Revoke Liability. I didn't hesitate. I didn't think about the fallout or the screaming phone calls that would start Monday morning. This wasn't revenge. It was a correction. An adjustment to the ledger. I tapped the button. A confirmation box popped up. Revoking this guarantee will immediately freeze all associated credit lines and may result in default. Do you wish to proceed? I pressed yes. The screen loaded for a second, a spinning gray circle that held the weight of my entire family's net worth. Then, a green checkmark appeared. Personal guarantee revoked. Line of credit suspended. Just like that. $1.2 million evaporated into the digital ether. I locked my phone and slipped it back into my bag. I smoothed the fabric of my dress, the one I'd paid for with my own salary, and pushed the oak doors open. The blast of noise and music hit me, but it felt different now. I walked back into the room. I found a waiter, took a fresh glass of champagne, and stood near the back wall. On stage, my father was hugging Samantha. My mother was beaming, clapping her hands together like a delighted child. They were raising their glasses to the merger, to the future, to the empire. I took a sip of the cold, crisp wine. It tasted excellent. I watched them celebrate a deal that was already dead. They just didn't know it yet. I wasn't a daughter anymore. I was the glitch in their system. The drive home was quiet. The kind of quiet that rings in your ears after a gunshot. I navigated the wet streets of the city, the amber streetlights blurring against the windshield like streaks of old gold. I knew what people would ask. I knew what Nathan would ask when I told him. Why, Morgan? You're a forensic accountant. You hunt fraud for a living. You trace hidden assets for Fortune 500 companies. How did you let your parents leverage your credit score for a $1.2 million loan? How were you that stupid? I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. It wasn't stupidity. It was conditioning. They call it the trap of normalized cruelty. It doesn't start with $1 million demand. It starts with a test. A small boundary violation to see if you'll flinch. It starts when you're 12, and your mother forgets to pick you up from school because she was buying your sister a prom dress even though prom was 3 years away. You sit on the curb for 4 hours, and when she finally arrives, she doesn't apologize. She sighs. She tells you that you're being dramatic for crying. So next time you don't cry, you learn to wait. You learn that your time is less valuable than her errands. It evolves. When I was 22, fresh out of college with my first signing bonus, my father called. He didn't ask how the job was. He said the yacht club dues were late, just a clerical error, but could I cover it until Monday? It was $2,000. I paid it. He never paid me back. When I asked, he laughed and said, "Consider it rent for 18 years of room and board." That was the precedent. The unspoken contract. Over the last 7 years, I became the silent investor in the lifestyle they flaunted. I paid for the consulting trips to Milan that Samantha posted on Instagram. I covered the liquidity gaps when my father's bad investments went south. I didn't do it because I was weak. I did it because I thought I was buying my way into the family portrait. I thought if I was useful enough, if I was solvent enough, eventually the transaction would settle. Eventually they would look at the ledger and see that I had paid my dues, that I had earned the right to be loved or at least respected. But that's the thing about normalized cruelty. It's like boiling a frog. You don't notice the water getting hotter because they turn up the heat 1 degree at a time. You adjust. You accommodate. You tell yourself it's just family. You tell yourself that being the reliable one is a compliment, not a curse. I pulled into the parking garage of my building. My headlights cut through the darkness. Tonight at the gala, the water finally boiled over. When Samantha made that toast, when my parents laughed, I finally saw the equation for what it was. They didn't see me as a partner. They didn't even see me as a person. I was an appliance. I was a toaster that printed money. And you don't thank a toaster for making toast. You only get angry when it breaks. I turned off the ignition. The engine ticked into silence. I sat there for a moment, staring at the concrete wall. I felt a strange, cold sense of relief washing over me. The guilt was gone. The hope was gone. The desperate childish need to please them had evaporated the moment my finger hit that revoke button. I wasn't their daughter anymore. I wasn't their safety net. I was just the auditor who had finally decided to close the books on a bad investment. I opened my car door and stepped out. My heels clicked against the concrete, sharp and rhythmic. It sounded like a countdown. Monday morning arrived with the sterile fluorescent hum of my office. I sat at my desk on the 42nd floor, surrounded by glass walls and the quiet murmur of forensic audits in progress. My dual monitors glowed with spreadsheets, rows of data that made sense, that followed rules, that balanced out to zero. At 9 o'clock sharp, the peace shattered. My personal phone, resting face up on the mahogany desk, lit up. Dad. I didn't answer immediately. I took a sip of my coffee, black, no sugar, and watched the screen vibrate. I knew exactly what was happening on the other end of the line. The bank officer had just called. The wire transfer scheduled for noon had been flagged. The funds were frozen. The merger was dead in the water. I swiped to answer and put it on speaker. I didn't say hello. What did you do? My father's voice wasn't just loud. It was distorted by a frequency of rage I hadn't heard since I was 16 and got a B+ in calculus. The bank just called, he screamed, the sound echoing slightly in my empty office. They said there's a hold on the credit line. They said the guarantor withdrew. Fix it, Morgan. Call them back right now and tell them it was a mistake. A clerical error. Fix it. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, studying the city skyline. It wasn't an error, I said, my voice level. I withdrew the guarantee. What he sounded like he was choking. You can't do that. That money is ours. That deal is ours. You are ruining this family, Morgan. Do you hear me? You are stealing our future. Stealing. There it was, the specific twisted logic of the narcissist. I'd studied fraud patterns for a living, but the psychology of my own parents was a darker kind of math. They call it cognitive dissonance, but in my family it was simply entitlement weaponized. To a rational person, if I stop lending you my car, I have simply reclaimed my property. I have set a boundary. But to a narcissist, that car was never mine to begin with. In their minds, my assets are their birthright. My credit score is their inventory. By withdrawing my support, I wasn't saving myself. In their twisted ledger, I was robbing them. I was taking something they believed they owned me. I'm not stealing anything, Dad, I said. I'm just not lending you my life anymore. Don't you give me that therapy garbage, he roared. You are an ungrateful, selfish brat. After everything we gave you, a roof, clothes, and education, I paid for my own education, I corrected. And I paid you rent. You fix this, he shouted, his voice cracking. Or so help me God, Morgan, you will never step foot in our house again. Okay, I said. And I hung up. My hand didn't shake. I felt a cold clinical detachment, like I was watching a stranger have a tantrum in a grocery store. A second later, a notification popped up. A voice note from Samantha. I pressed play. Her voice was shrill, breathless, likely recorded while pacing in her walk-in closet. You are so pathetic, Morgan. You couldn't stand it, could you? You couldn't stand seeing me happy at the gala. You couldn't stand that for one night people were looking at me and not your boring little job. You're just jealous. You're trying to ruin my moment because you're miserable and alone and no amount of money will make you interesting. I watched the little waveform ripple and flatten into a straight line. Jealousy. That was their only framework. They couldn't conceive of a world where I simply wanted to be left alone. They couldn't imagine that I wasn't trying to hurt them, I was just trying to stop them from bleeding me dry. They weren't hurt that I had left. They were furious that the appliance had stopped working. The toaster had refused to toast. The ATM had eaten their card. I didn't reply. I didn't try to explain or defend myself. That was the old Morgan, the one who thought logic could penetrate their delusion. The new Morgan knew better. You don't argue with people who are inventing their own reality. You just audit them. I turned my phone over, silencing the barrage of follow-up texts. I turned back to my monitors. I had work to do. And for the first time in years, the only numbers I had to worry about were my own. I called Nathan at 10:15. He picked up on the first ring, which is rare for a corporate litigator on a Monday morning. It's done, I said. He didn't ask if I was sure. He didn't ask if I was okay. He knew me better than that. I'll draft the notice of severance, he said, his voice crisp and professional. I'll have the courier there by noon. Do you want a restraining order attached or just the financial separation? Just the financials, I said. For now. I hung up. The legal machinery was in motion. But my brain, the part of me that had spent a decade hunting down hidden assets for billion-dollar conglomerates, wasn't satisfied. The numbers in my head didn't balance. My father's reaction had been too volatile. Samantha's voice note had been too defensive. There was something else. I still had my administrative access to the family business servers. My father, in his infinite technological incompetence, had never learned how to revoke user permissions. He probably thought yelling at me on the phone was the same thing as a firewall. I opened a new window on my desktop. I logged into the Davis Group accounting portal. The interface was clunky, outdated, a digital relic I had begged them to upgrade for years. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I was just looking. It's what forensic accountants do. We look at the patterns until the anomalies start to bleed through the white noise. I pulled the last 3 years of general ledgers. I sorted by vendor. I filtered by outgoing expenses. Everything looked typical at first. The inflated travel budgets, the leased luxury cars written off as company vehicles, the country club memberships categorized under client development. It was sloppy, borderline unethical, but standard practice for a small family empire run by narcissists. Then I saw it. A series of recurring payments labeled consulting fees. External. They were small enough to fly under the radar, $3,000 here, $4,000 there. But they were consistent. Monthly. I clicked on the vendor details. The recipient account was obscured, but the routing number was familiar. I cross-referenced it with my personal files. It was Samantha's personal checking account. $45,000 over the last 18 months. I leaned forward. My breath hitched just once. My parents were paying Samantha a salary she didn't earn. That wasn't surprising. That was just favoritism. That was just Tuesday. But then I clicked on the tax filing status for the vendor. To pay a consultant legally, you need a tax ID. A social security number. I stared at the screen. The number listed under consulting fees wasn't Samantha's. It was mine. The room suddenly felt very cold. I blinked, sure that I was misreading the digits. I highlighted the cell. I zoomed in. 9 digits. My 9 digits. My parents hadn't just been giving Samantha an allowance. They were paying her $45,000 a year tax-free and reporting the income to the IRS under my name. They were laundering money to their golden child and sticking me with the tax liability. I sat back in my chair. The leather creaked. This wasn't just cruelty anymore. This wasn't just financial abuse or emotional blackmail. This was a felony. This was federal tax fraud. If the IRS audited the business and given my father's sloppy bookkeeping that was only a matter of time, they wouldn't come for him. They would come for me. They would see $45,000 of unreported income attached to my Social Security number. I could lose my CPA license. I could lose my career. I could go to prison. I thought about the times I'd done their taxes for free. I thought about the times I'd lectured them on compliance, on proper documentation, on the importance of clean books. And the whole time they were nodding, smiling, and using my identity to subsidize Samantha's shoe collection. I didn't feel the urge to scream. I felt a terrifying icy clarity. The last tether of guilt, the final microscopic thread of obligation I felt toward them, snapped. I picked up my phone. I called Nathan back. "Don't send the courier," I said. "Why did you change your mind?" "No," I said, staring at the 9 digits on my screen. "I need you to come to my office and bring the criminal statutes regarding identity theft and tax fraud." The scope of representation just changed. "Morgan," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "What did you find?" "I found the leverage," I said. "I found the ghost payroll." I printed the ledger. The sound of the printer whirring to life was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. It wasn't a document, it was a weapon, and I knew exactly where to aim it. They were waiting for me in the lobby of my office building. It was a tableau of chaotic entitlement against a backdrop of polished granite and security guards. My father was pacing his face a dangerous shade of crimson. My mother was weeping into a handkerchief, performing grief for an audience of uninterested bike messengers. Samantha stood slightly apart, checking her reflection in the glass, looking like she was waiting for a valet rather than an execution. I walked out of the elevator. I didn't slow down. "You," my father snarled, spotting me. He started toward the turnstiles. The security guard, a man named Elias, who I brought coffee to every Friday, stepped forward, hand on his belt. "It's okay, Elias," I said, my voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space. "Let them in. We'll use conference room B." I led them into the glass-walled meeting room on the ground floor. It was designed for transparency. It was designed for people with nothing to hide. My father slammed the door shut. The sound vibrated through the glass. "You think you can hide behind lawyers," he shouted. He threw a manila envelope onto the table. It slid across the mahogany surface and stopped inches from my hand. "We've spoken to counsel. You maliciously interfered with a business contract. You sabotaged the merger. We are going to sue you for damages, Morgan. We are going to bleed you dry." And my mother added, her voice trembling with weaponized disappointment, "Your father is writing you out of the will. Today. Unless you call the bank right now and fix this mess." Samantha smirked. "You're done, Morgan. You played your little power game, and you lost. Sign the paper." I looked at them. I looked at the expensive suits, the designer bags, the sheer unadulterated confidence of people who had never faced a consequence they couldn't charm or buy their way out of. "I don't want to be in the will," I said. My father blinked. "What?" "The will implies there are assets to inherit," I said calmly. "But we both know the business is insolvent without my credit line. So really you're threatening to cut me out of your debt. Don't you get smart with me?" "Sit down," I said. I didn't shout it. I said it with the same flat, absolute authority I used when testifying in federal court. It was a tone they had never heard from me. It was the voice of the auditor. My father stopped. Saturday? I reached into my bag and pulled out my own folder. It wasn't manila. It was a crisp, black presentation binder. I placed it in the center of the table. "I'm not here to talk about the loan," I said. "I'm here to talk about the payroll." I opened the binder. The spreadsheet was printed on heavy stock paper. The rows were color-coded. The consulting fees were highlighted in neon yellow. I did a forensic audit of the ledgers this morning, I said. I found $45,000 in payments to Samantha over the last 18 months. Samantha rolled her eyes. So what? I consult. I help with branding. Dad pays me. It's called a job, Morgan. You should try getting one that doesn't make you miserable. I don't care that he pays you, I said. I care how he reports it. I flipped the page. A tax filing document. You see this number here? I pointed to the tax ID field next to the payments. That's not your social security number, Samantha. That's mine. The silence that sucked the air out of the room was instant and violent. My father's face went from red to a terrifying pale gray. My mother stopped crying mid-sob. Samantha frowned, looking between us, too financially illiterate to understand the bomb that had just been dropped, but smart enough to smell the smoke. You must be mistaken, my father stammered. A clerical error. The accountant. I am the accountant. I cut him off. And this isn't an error. It's a pattern. You've been funneling tax-free cash to Samantha and assigning the tax liability to me. You're laundering money through my identity. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the table. That is a felony, Dad. It's identity theft. It's tax fraud. And since the amounts cross state lines, it's federal? Morgan, my mother whispered, reaching a hand toward me. We needed to balance the brackets. You make so much money we thought you wouldn't notice. It was for the family. It wasn't for the family, I said. It was for you, and it's over. I slid a single sheet of paper toward them. It wasn't a lawsuit. It was a list. Here are my terms. 1. You will file amended returns for the last 3 years by Friday. 2. You will repay every cent of the tax liability I incurred plus interest. 3. You will never contact me again. No calls, no emails, no showing up at my office. And if we don't? Samantha challenged, though her voice shook. I checked my watch. I have drafted a whistleblower report for the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. It is saved as a draft on my server. If I don't receive a confirmation from my lawyer that you've signed the separation agreement by 5 o'clock today, I click send. I stood up. I picked up my bag. You have 60 minutes, I said. I suggest you stop trying to sue me and start looking for a criminal defense attorney. I walked out of the conference room. I didn't look back, but I saw their reflections in the glass walls, slumped small and utterly defeated. It was the quietest slaughter I had ever witnessed. 6 months later, I stood across the street from the house I grew up in. There was a sold sign on the lawn, slanted slightly to the left. A moving truck was idling in the driveway, swallowing the last of the velvet sofas and the crystal chandeliers. It hadn't taken long for the dominoes to fall. Without the $1.2 million line of credit, the merger had collapsed within 48 hours. Without the merger, the business's existing debt became due. And without my signature to restructure it, the banks had moved in like sharks. It was a total liquidation. My father had tried to fight it, of course. He blustered and threatened, but he was fighting math, and math always wins. He and my mother were moving into a 2-bedroom condo on the other side of town. Samantha stripped of her phantom salary, and her credit cards had taken a job as a receptionist at a boutique. She had blocked me on social media, which I considered her final gift to me. I watched the movers hoist a large gilded mirror into the truck. It was the same mirror I used to check my outfit in before school, always worrying if I looked professional enough, serious enough, worthy enough. It was strange to see their empire dismantled. For years I had been terrified of their power. Their judgment had felt like the voice of God. Their disapproval had been a physical weight I carried in my chest. But standing there watching their life get packed into cardboard boxes, I realized something profound. They call it the power illusion of the empty wallet. Their status, their arrogance, their power, it was never real. It was a costume, a rental, and the rent had been paid with my credit. They weren't powerful people who happened to need my help. They were destitute souls who had wrapped themselves in a lifestyle they couldn't afford, hoping the fabric would hold them together. When I took my money back, I didn't just bankrupt them financially. I bankrupted their identity. Without the gala invites and the country club memberships, they were just two bitter people in a condo wondering why the world had stopped clapping. I turned away from the house. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel happy. I just felt balanced. I drove back to my own apartment. It wasn't a mansion. It didn't have crystal chandeliers, but the deed was in my name. The furniture was paid for. And when I walked through the door, the silence didn't feel lonely. It felt like peace. I sat down at my laptop. I opened the folder labeled Family Audit. Inside were the ledgers, the tax documents, the recordings of the voice notes, the evidence of my liberation. I didn't need them anymore. The IRS had received the amended returns. The check for the back taxes had cleared. The separation agreement was filed with the court. I selected all files. I dragged them to the trash bin. I moved the cursor to empty trash. I clicked. The screen blinked once and the folder vanished. 0 bytes remaining. I closed the laptop. I walked out to the balcony where Nathan was waiting with 2 glasses of wine. He smiled when he saw me. "All done?" he asked. "All done," I said. I took the glass. The city lights were coming on a grid of golden sparks stretching out to the horizon. My credit score was 820. My conscience was clear. The debt was paid in full.